Yep, that's me, looking like a complete tool bag on the internet. But you know what? It's allowed me to see improvements in my real-life driving. On the racing side, I've shaved seconds off of lap times, and on the drifting side, I was able to link the full course at my first event. From my first video on this channel, I've been shouting from the rooftops how much I recommend sim racing for anyone trying to improve their real-life driving skills. So in this video, I'm going to cover some basics on sim racing setups for anyone thinking about building their first rig or upgrading an existing one. As you may have already discovered, there are a ton of decisions to make when building your first sim rig. From brands, types of wheelbases, and so on, you can spend an absolute ton of money, or you can try to go the more budget-friendly route. But let's jump in. The first thing you're going to want to consider is what system you're going to race on. And essentially, you can either do console with PlayStation or Xbox, or you can play on PC. On console, you have a handful of classics like Gran Turismo and Forza, though these games tend to fall more in the simcade category, which means they're meant to be easier and more accessible versus a true racing sim. Assetto Corsa seems to be the fan favorite, which is thankfully available across Xbox, PlayStation, and PC, so this is likely the game you're going to wind up playing on if you're looking for realism. Now listen, I'll cut to the chase. As someone who has used the same exact sim setup on both a PS4 and PC, I would 100% recommend spending the extra money on buying or building a PC setup. First, in addition to the number of more realistic driving sims available on PC, you also generally have more flexibility in terms of settings, as well as peripherals, including VR headsets, handbrakes, and button boxes. Assetto Corsa on PC also offers the ability to expand the game pretty significantly with community-created cars and tracks. Second, there seems to be a difference in the gameplay or handling on console versus PC. When I owned Assetto Corsa on PS4, my lap times were faster than what I could put down with the same exact sim setup on PC. My personal recommendation is to build or buy a PC, as this is going to give you the most realistic driving experience overall. Next up are visuals, aka what kind of screen you're going to play on, and this could either be a TV, a monitor setup, or a VR headset. For the longest time, I literally just pushed my sim rig in front of my TV in the living room, and this worked fine for me. But after playing with multiple monitor setups, which give you the ability to look left and right, I would definitely recommend that over parking in front of the TV in terms of immersion. But speaking of immersion, once I upgraded to VR, I don't think I could ever go back to screen again. The ability to look around inside the cockpit as well as out your side windows if you're racing or tandeming with somebody really makes you feel like you're in the game, and I don't mean in the cheesy EA Sports sense. When I play on a regular screen, I don't find myself getting into the game nearly as much, and at real life events, I've caught myself trying to take off my VR headset in between runs. That's how much it gets into your head. The drawback of VR is that it does tend to be more expensive, both in terms of the headset, as well as needing some higher end components on a PC to get a stable frame rate. Then of course, you'll constantly feel like someone is standing behind you. What was that? Some of the Windows mixed reality headsets like my HP Reverb G2 tend to require a little more bandwidth, so if you don't have a decent PC and you want to do VR, you'll probably want to lean towards Oculus. Next we'll jump into cockpits, and that's a fun word to say, cockpits. There are a ton of options in the market that all essentially do the same thing, but they generally break down to three categories. The first of which is a full sim rig with a racing seat, the second being compact or foldable rigs that are meant to be moved or stored, and then finally purpose-built setups like motion rigs. Then of course there's home built, which could fall into probably any of those three categories. My current setup is this GT Omega wheel stand that I bought when I was living in an apartment, so it was meant to be folded up and stored between uses. If you have a small space to work with or budget is tight, having one of the smaller rigs isn't the end of the world, but it definitely helps in terms of immersion if you have a full rig with a racing seat. I started way back in the day in a Wheel Stand Pro, sitting in one of those crazy looking IKEA chairs, and even then I saw a bunch of benefit to my driving. And now onto the main event, which is your wheel setup. And as mentioned, there are a ton of different brands and types of wheels to choose from. Some of the main competitors at the moment seem to be Logitech, Thrustmaster, Simagic, and Fanatec. And as far as types of wheels, you have gear-driven, belt-driven, and direct drive. The principle behind gear and belt drive is similar, where they use a smaller motor with a gearing system to help generate more torque than that motor could otherwise generate on its own. Out of the two, gear drive tends to be more clunky due to the gear meshing, whereas belt tends to be more smooth. Direct drive is somewhat more self-explanatory, where your wheel is more directly attached to a larger motor, which helps generate higher levels of force feedback as well as more precise feeling. These wheels tend to be more premium and run on the more expensive side as a result. The current Logitech wheels fall under the gear drive bucket, so that would be the G29 and the G920, and they're okay for general racing but tend to be really slow to react, which is especially noticeable for drifting. I actually learned for the most part on a Logitech G920, but on the drifting side I got to a point where I was doing tandems and other people were transitioning a lot faster than I could. And as a result I found myself kind of having to physically force the steering wheel to countersteer faster, which isn't realistic. And there are some workarounds in terms of settings to make the wheel more usable, but it never really overcomes the limitations due to the design. Eventually I upgraded to my current Thrustmaster T300 setup, which is belt driven and leaps and bounds better than the G29. When I first transitioned over to this wheel, I found myself straightening out of drifts because it was countersteering a lot faster than I was used to. This setup is effectively what I use to transition over to the real thing, and I still come back to it in between events to practice. I've also spent hours driving a handful of higher end wheels, including Simagic and Fanatec, and you can definitely feel the difference in terms of overall build quality and force feedback, but I think the jump from Logitech to Thrustmaster is a lot bigger than the jump from Thrustmaster to, say, Fanatec. So yes, there are some direct drive wheels like the Simagic Alpha Mini that's going to be an upgrade compared to the Thrustmaster, but for me personally, the difference in driving wasn't necessarily worth an extra, say, $300 to upgrade. Moral of the story, treat the T300 as the entry-level wheel, and don't get sucked into the low sticker price for the Logitech G29 or 920. And most manufacturers make accessories that pair with their wheels, including shifters, handbrakes, pedals, and steering wheels. I will say shifters tend to be more straightforward, but pedals tend to be a little more complicated. Lower tier pedals tend to be more linear and don't do a great job of emulating an actual brake pedal. A lot of manufacturers like Logitech or Thrustmaster will add this little rubber or silicone stopper, but it really doesn't compare to some of the features you get on higher end pedal sets like load cells, which are meant to more realistically replicate the feel of an actual brake pedal. So it might be worth an upgrade there, but realistically even the lower tier pedal sets are going to be just fine when you're starting out. If you're looking to drift, you're definitely going to want to get a handbrake, and if you're on console, you're going to need to make sure you get one that plugs into your wheelbase. Those tend to run a lot more expensive than some of the cheaper options you can get on Amazon, which I'm currently using with my PC setup. This one right here was under 50 bucks, and I can't see any reason to ever replace it. Another accessory a lot of folks consider is a larger diameter steering wheel. The ones that tend to come as a package tend to be much smaller and feel maybe a little toyish, and a full-size wheel like this one will better emulate what it feels like to be in an actual car. The main drawback is that full-size wheels tend to be a little heavier, so it will dull the force feedback a little bit, and the larger diameter gives you more leverage to fight the motor, so that will also make the force feedback feel weaker, so you just may need to turn it up accordingly. Nonetheless, I hope that helps point you in the right direction. I would suggest joining sim racing and drifting groups on Reddit and Facebook, as they're usually a great spot for reviews on gear, as well as tips and tricks in getting started. As always, I'm more than happy to answer any questions, and if you disagree with anything I've said, the best way to get back at me would be to like this video and subscribe. I would hate that.